What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my final thoughts ahead of the Game Week 36 deadline, and there is a lot to talk about. So let's begin with something we haven't really discussed that much this week: Isak and Wilson. Eddie Howe had his press conference today. He was asked about the two of them playing together against Arsenal, and he said they were on the pitch together, but they weren't a partnership as such. I saw enough from Alex, who played well, I thought, to know he can play in that position. So that's knowing that Isak can play left wing. And I know Callum in the number 9 role is an outstanding player, so it is something I'll definitely consider. I don't know if there's a huge amount we can take away from this. I guess for anyone that wants to go for Isak and Wilson, this is quite positive. I did watch the video of him answering this question. I wouldn't say he was massively upbeat about it, but he was never going to turn around and say, nah, Isak's wasted on the left wing, and yes, Callum Wilson's great, but I would have rather had Isak there instead. That just wasn't going to happen. So I guess in the grand scheme of things, this is fairly positive. A lot of whether they play together is probably going to depend on the fitness levels of other players. So Eddie Howe was also asked about Sean Longstaff. He went to see a specialist, and I think there was a few concerns that there's some structural damage in his foot, but there wasn't, which is good news. There is a bit of damage to one of the ligaments. He's been rescanned today, which we hope will show an improvement. It's unclear when he's back, or when he'll be back, but it's not a long-term issue. Again, I watched the video of him being asked about Longstaff, and he said if he recovers quick, he could be back next week, but he might also just not feature again this season. Obviously, there's only a few weeks left anyway, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be available for Leeds whatsoever, and probably not for Brighton either. So that probably bumps up the chances of Isak and Wilson playing together a little bit, because obviously Joe Linton will play in midfield, and they'll have to have someone else playing in that left wing spot. Now, I will say, just to kind of temper expectations a little bit, there is a chance they don't play together. He could play Anthony Gordon on the left instead, although to be fair, he hasn't looked great so far in a Newcastle shirt. And obviously St. Maximin is also back from injury as well now. He got about, I think it was 12 or 13 minutes against Arsenal. So at some point he's going to play left wing as well. Now, my prediction is Isak and Wilson to start against Leeds, and then only Isak to start against Brighton. I think that's when St. Maximin will come in. And the reason for that is I think St. Maximin might need another game to kind of come off the bench, this time maybe get 20 to 30 minutes, to then be ready for a start. I could be completely wrong. I've got no inside knowledge or anything about Newcastle, but I do think against Leeds there's a good chance they start together. Although, of course, not a guarantee. There's every chance it's just Wilson or it's just Isak. What I would say for anyone looking to buy them is something like this. If Isak starts and Wilson's benched against Leeds, and we might get early team news because it is the first kickoff of Game Week 36, so make sure you're tuned into the deadline stream. If you want to captain one of these two, then you've got to captain the one that starts against Leeds. So you're captaining Isak, and you could potentially buy Wilson. The only reason I would say potentially is because if Isak starts against Leeds, yes, it looks pretty likely then Wilson would start against Brighton, but I guess it's not a guarantee, right? It's a Saturday 12:30 kickoff, and then Brighton game is, I think, 7:30 on Thursday. That's quite a lot of rest time. And if Isak starts because Eddie Howe thinks that it's better playing just one of them, the same could happen against Brighton. But obviously we've seen before in midweek fixtures that Wilson comes in because Isak can't necessarily start all those matches in a row. So if Isak starts, Wilson doesn't, obviously you're not going to captain Wilson because he's going to miss a lot of the Leeds game. If Wilson starts and Isak is on the bench, then Wilson probably becomes the better captain out of the two. For what it's worth, you don't have to captain one of these two. You could go for Trippier or Matoma or McAllister or someone like that. But this is for people that want to captain one of the Newcastle forwards. So obviously captain Wilson because he's going to get the Leeds game. And I think buy Isak. And the reason that I've put buy Isak when he gets benched, but only potentially buy Wilson, is I just don't see Isak being benched for 2 games in a row. So if he doesn't start against Leeds, you'd say he's almost certain to start against Brighton. And either of these players, if they don't start one of these 2 games, they're going to come on for like 25 to 30 minutes anyway. So the minutes are generally pretty good for both. But I think if Isak doesn't start, unless there's an injury there, he's almost certain to start Brighton. So I think you can still safely buy him if you want both of these players in the double. And obviously if they both start, I would say that Isak is probably then better for minutes. I think he's more likely to also start the Brighton game. But of course, if you want to captain a differential and go for Wilson, because when he's on the pitch, he's a higher goal threat and stuff like that, by all means do it. But for me, I think Isak would become the better option if they both start together. And of course, you can just buy whichever one you don't own. And as I've said all week, if you're only buying one, I think Isak is the way to go, unless obviously Wilson starts. There's a lot to think about. We're all just going to be hoping we get early team news on Saturday. But if we don't, and you're unsure about whether Wilson's going to start, I think you've got to buy Isak if we don't get any early team news. So just when you thought things were looking a little bit too easy for game week 36, Ten Hag has confirmed that Rashford has an injury. So he said he has a problem, an injury on his leg. So he is a big question mark for tomorrow. But we are happy Rafa Varane is back. Now I'll come on to Varane later on because obviously Rashford is the big news story here. There was a follow-up question that said, how confident are you of Rashford being available for this game? And Ten Hag said, as I say, doubtful, more than doubtful. So big question mark. So it doesn't sound good. I think from an FPL point of view, probably no need to panic. It's not ideal him missing such a good game against Wolves at home, but a lot of people out there have got decent benches. So for me, it would be Trent Alexander-Arnold or Estepinian coming on for him. It's not the end of the world. I don't really want to bench either of those two players anyway. And of course, Man United have got that double in 37 of Bournemouth away and Chelsea at home. And if Rashford is fit and available for those two games, you're going to want him in your team. And it's worth kind of remembering that Man United have been playing every 3 to 4 days. That's not the case at the moment. Actually, it's quite funny that Rashford hasn't had a huge amount of long-term injuries this season. And Man United have played a lot of games. All of a sudden, they get a week off, and now we find out that he's actually injured. But look, it is what it is. These things happen. But if he was to miss out against Wolves, it's another week until that Bournemouth game. So I don't think there's any need to kind of rush into getting rid of him or something like that. Maybe if you're free hitting in game week 38 and therefore the transfers in 36 and 37, there's much more reason to use them all up, then maybe you could get rid of him. But I think for most people, you're probably just looking at holding on to him and hoping that he's back for the double. The big question is, do you play him this week? And then if he doesn't come on at all, then obviously you get someone off your bench. Or do you just play that bench option instead? So again, in the Rashford and Trent Alexander-Arnold scenario, should you now just play Trent and bench Rashford? Now, I agree with most people when they say that, you know, if Rashford's fit, then he'll start. And if he's not, he just won't be involved whatsoever. But we shouldn't ignore the possibility of him being on the bench and then coming on for 10 to 20 minutes. But I just think because the league, not the league title, obviously Man United are completely out of that. Because top four now is looking so tight with Liverpool breathing down their necks, I think they'll do everything they can to play him if possible. And if that's not possible, you would have just assumed that he's not going to play any part whatsoever. So because of that, as it stands, and this news has only really broken kind of the last hour or so before I started recording, I think I'm going to play Rashford and just let someone come off the bench if he doesn't play at all. Because I would just be worried about the damage he could do in a home game against Wolves. I know he hasn't been scoring a huge amount of goals recently compared to that purple patch he had before, but that is still a great fixture for a player that has done really well so far this season. So I'm probably going to play him. But if any news comes out in tonight's embargoed quotes and stuff like that puts even more doubt in my mind about him featuring, then I might just put my bench player on and just bench Rashford for this week and get him back for game week 37. Just quickly on Varane, few people asking him being back, what does that mean? The likelihood is that at some point, it won't necessarily be this week because he is only just back from injury, that he would play right centre-back, Lindelof would drop out, and Luke Shaw would just continue playing left centre-back. There is a chance at some point that Varane just ignores the left-footed part of the centre-backs, plays two right-footers, and puts Luke Shaw back at left-back. But there's no guarantee of that. Basically, if you're buying a Man United defender right now, you should try and find the money for Luke Shaw, because nobody else is nailed whatsoever. Lindelof could miss out because of Varane. Wan-Bissaka could play right-back, or it could be Dalot. Dalot could play left-back, or it could be Malacia, or it could be Luke Shaw. Either way, for the next 4 matches, if he's fit, Luke Shaw is going to start every single one. So if you bought Lindelof recently, don't panic. Just play him against Wolves. You'll probably be fine. But going forward, if Varane is fit enough to start, he's probably going to be in most 11s if he's fit and available. Anyway, let me know down below, what are you doing with Rashford? Are you selling him? And if not, are you going to start him? So quick update on Solly March. De Zerbi was asked today whether or not he'll play again this season. He said, I don't know. Difficult question, more difficult to answer. I hope he can play the last 2 games. Now we know Brighton have got 5 fixtures left. So if he plays the final 2 games, that's Man City at home, the second game in double game week 37, then Aston Villa away in game week 38. So from an FPL point of view, that's just probably not good enough. He's going to miss both games in double game week 36 and probably the easier of the 2 in game week 37, and it's not even guaranteed he'd be back for Man City anyway, right? There is obviously a chance that maybe he will be back sooner, misses both in 36, and then happens to be back for Southampton at home. But 1, I don't know if anyone will be willing to take that risk, and 2, from what De Zerbi has said, that seems really unlikely. So he's a very easy sell now, and if you've got a little bit of money in the bank, the obvious players to go to are whichever ones you don't own out of Mitoma and McAllister. If you don't have enough money for that, you could bench him this week and play someone off your bench instead. You could take a -4 if that makes sense for your team. Everyone's going to have to weigh that up on an individual level. If you don't have any money, you don't want to take a hit and you don't want to bench him, and you want to stick with Brighton, then it's really difficult because the only other midfielder you could look at is Buonanotte, who has started the last 2 games when March has been out, but it's not a guarantee that continues. Someone like Enciso could go and play there instead. He looks like a fun punt for what it's worth at 4.6 million, but he's a forward, not a midfielder, so it gets a bit tricky. You could look at someone like Gross, but he is more expensive than March anyway. And if Veltman isn't back, which I'll come on to in a minute, the second part of that tweet, then Gross would probably play right back anyway. I mean, there is a chance he'd play further forward. Caicedo could go and play right back. There's lots of different ways De Zerbi could play it. But if you need someone at March's price or cheaper, you're only literally looking at Buonanotte. If you can go to a Newcastle midfielder, then you could look at someone like Joe Willock instead, who's completely nailed on. But if you want to stick to Brighton, you've really got to find that money to go to Mitoma and McAllister. So not looking good for Solly March. May or may not play again this season. Certainly looks out of double game week 36. Just quickly on Veltman, I want to understand if Joe Veltman can play. If he can, I have to play another right back. That could be promising if he does end up being back, that Gross could then go into midfield and McAllister might go back to playing as that number 10 again. Not all the time, but some of the time. The only thing is, as I've already said, De Zerbi's got loads of different ways he could do this. He could play Veltman a right back, keep McAllister in that number 6 position instead, and actually play Gross instead of March on the right, and not play Buonanotte or Enciso there. So I think with the amount of fixtures they've got, we should probably expect a little bit of rotation. If you're trying to buy a player that's nailed on, outside of the likes of Mitoma, McAllister and Gross, it's probably going to be difficult. But if you want to go for someone cheap, like a fun punt, Buonanotte or Enciso might be the ones. I feel like one way or another, we always end up talking about Man City in these final thoughts videos. So let's keep that tradition up. So Pep on Nathan Ake, much better, but I don't know. We have training in a few hours and we will see. So I think this is quite an easy one. If you don't own Ake, there's no real reason to look to bring him in this week. You should try and put that decision off until game week 37. And if you really need a City defender in game week 36, I would try and find the money for a Stones or Diaz, and then also hope that they play against Everton, right? Which I think they probably will, although it's not obviously a guarantee. And if you already own Ake, it feels like an easy one where you just put him on the bench, wait and see what happens against Everton and Real Madrid, get the latest updates from Pep, and then reassess ahead of double game week 37. If you're in a situation where it would be ideal to play him this week, I don't think there's a massive amount of risk with that, because it feels like one of those where you'll either play from the start or just not be involved at all. So that's Nathan Ake. And then I wonder if we can guess some of the rotation for the Everton game based on what Pep said about why he didn't make a substitute against Real Madrid. So he said, every player is ready to play and give contribution. I thought a lot about the last minutes to do a substitute, but I thought about the players on the bench are so dynamic, so Foden, Alvarez and Mahrez, but in that moment we didn't need that. So maybe those three players are the type of players that can make something happen, but give you a little bit less control. And I guess at that stage of the game, he was probably just happy with the draw. So maybe that's why they didn't come on. But against Everton, where maybe they're sitting in deep trying to defend, perhaps that's where you do need those kind of players in and around the box to make something happen. Now, for what it's worth, I do think Mahrez will come in for Bernardo Silva. I'm not so sure about Foden and Alvarez, because if Mahrez does start, Foden would then have to play on the left for Jack Grealish. And yes, he's just played against Real Madrid, but he also got a rest against Leeds. So does he need another one against Everton? Not necessarily. I guess Foden could play on the right, but that means Mahrez would miss out. And then you come on to Alvarez, and if he's going to play, we have seen him, Haaland and De Bruyne play together now against Leeds, but I'm not sure that's something that's going to continue to happen. And I think Rodri will play again, because again, he got a rest against Leeds. Does he need another one against Everton? With their midfield, I just don't see that happening. So I think Alvarez could come in for De Bruyne, but it's not a guarantee. So if you're an Alvarez owner, I think I'd be more confident of him playing than maybe I would be of a Phil Foden. I think Alvarez will probably come in for De Bruyne, who didn't get rested against Leeds, and then Haaland will probably just play again. So my guess at the attack will be Rodri, Gundogan, De Bruyne. I think Rodri, Gundogan, Alvarez, and then probably Grealish. I think he actually will start, but again, I can't guarantee it. Haaland up front, then Mahrez on the right. So I actually think that Foden might miss out against Everton. But again, I'm just guessing. I could be completely wrong. And then he went on to talk about rhythm. We need to increase, I think that's supposed to be our rhythm, to increase the moments to everyone else to a high level. Everyone will be important with so many games. So everyone's going to get minutes at times. But I think we're all setting ourselves up where we think there's going to be mass rotation against Everton. I'm just not sure that's going to be the case, especially when Arsenal have beaten Newcastle to keep the title race alive. That does put some pressure on Man City. So I think we could even see like a Laporte or Ake left back, then just Diaz and Stones as normal with a Kanji, and obviously Stones would then go and play in midfield, and then I've already said the attack. So I'm not actually expecting a huge amount of changes, but I think if I was an Alvarez or a Mahrez owner, I would take the risk that they're going to start and play them in my 11 against Everton away. There weren't really a lot of questions that were different to what I already covered in the press conference updates, but I did see a few people discussing this. Would you start Raya or Kepa? West Ham could rotate for their European second leg, and Brentford defence has been better than Chelsea this season. Now, I looked into the numbers about who has been the better defence. Raya is sitting on 10 clean sheets compared to Kepa with 9. In terms of expected goals conceded, Chelsea are at 1.27 per 90 minutes. Brentford slightly worse at 1.29, but both very close together. And then in terms of actual goals conceded, Chelsea have conceded 39, Brentford 45, although they have played one game more. So overall, it's probably a lot closer than you would expect, but I fully appreciate that right now Chelsea are under Lampard, they're not winning many games, they are conceding goals, they're missing the likes of Chilwell, Cucurella, Reece James, etc. Maybe it's not the best time to kind of target their defence. That being said, I'm very drawn to fixtures, and I just think that Nottingham Forest at home on paper is better than West Ham at home, and therefore I would probably play Kepa. Now, it's worth saying that last time this was a big discussion, I chose Kepa over Raya, and I think Kepa lost the clean sheet, and Raya went and got like a 6, 7, 8, 9 pointer, something like that. So I've been wrong before, I will be wrong in the future, and I may well be wrong right now. If you want to play Raya instead of Kepa, that's exactly what you should do. But I would always go for the fixtures, and I just prefer that Nottingham Forest at home game. I know the narrative towards the end of the season becomes, relegation sides, they need to win games, therefore they're going to attack more, but they also really don't want to lose a game either, and I just don't see Forest going all guns blazing against Chelsea. And West Ham might rotate. They didn't before the first leg, which was yesterday. They won 2-1. That might be because it was a home game against Man United and they were only on 34 points. Obviously, they got the win now. They're on 37. They're not mathematically safe, I don't think, but it's very unlikely they'll get relegated now. So they should be in the Premier League again next season. So they might rotate a little bit. They have got a lead going into the second leg, so that might be on David Moyes' mind. I'm just not convinced they're going to rotate so much that then becomes the easier fixture. So I don't necessarily think that Brentford are a massively better defence than Chelsea, and I do think Chelsea have got the better fixture. They are my reasons for picking Kepa. If you want to go Raya, absolutely do it. It's a very close call. Go with the one you're happier with. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll catch you tomorrow for the deadline stream.